Hey plant lovers, welcome back. Today we're going inside the mystery of the yellowing ZZ plant. And what I discovered while researching this is going to completely reframe how you think about this plant and what it's actually doing when those leaves start to change. Picture this. It's a Sunday afternoon, late October, and you're straightening up the living room. You've had your ZZ plant on that shelf for, what, maybe 3 years now? You barely think about it. That's kind of the whole reason you got it. Low maintenance, unkillable, the one plant you don't have to worry about. But today, as you pass by, something stops you. 2 of the lower stems are going soft at the base, and the leaves, there are maybe 6 or 7 of them, have turned this deep, watery yellow. Not a pretty golden yellow, a yellow that looks wrong, like something is dying. And you think, I barely even touched this plant. How is this happening? Here's what makes this so disorienting. The ZZ plant, Zamioculcas zamifolia, has a reputation as the toughest houseplant on the market. You can forget to water it for 2 months. You can put it in a dark hallway. You can leave it while you travel for 6 weeks and come home to find it exactly as you left it. And yet, right now, for reasons you can't explain, it is turning yellow. In your home. Under your care. So the question everyone asks first is, am I overwatering? And the answer might be yes. But here's what almost nobody tells you. That yellowing is not just a symptom of a mistake. In many cases, it is a signal, a deliberate, biologically encoded communication. A message that this plant has been trying to send for weeks before it finally became visible. And here's what's wild. The scientific explanation for that signal, and the spiritual explanation that communities around the world have been passing down for generations. They arrive at the exact same conclusion, from completely different directions. But before we dive in, hit that like and subscribe, because what's coming is going to make you see this plant in an entirely different way. And that shift in perspective might be the thing that finally saves it. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The ZZ plant is not a delicate plant. This is not a fiddle-leaf fig. This is not a maidenhair fern that wilts if you look at it wrong. This is a plant that evolved in the semi-arid scrublands of Eastern Africa, in places where rain doesn't come for months, where the soil dries to dust, where survival is the whole project. It stores water in its roots, in those thick rhizomes, the way a camel stores water in its hump. It photosynthesizes more efficiently than almost any other common houseplant. It will survive conditions that would kill nearly anything else. So when it turns yellow, really turns yellow, multiple leaves, stems going soft, it's not being dramatic. It's not randomly struggling. It is responding to something specific, something measurable, something that changed in its environment. And that's the question driving everything we're going to explore today. What changed? And why does this particular plant respond to that change with yellow? There are 2 kinds of ZZ plant owners. There's the person who's had one for 18 years, in the same corner of the same apartment, and never once seen it go yellow. And there's the person who got one last spring, and watched it start yellowing by October. Same plant, different environments, entirely different outcomes. What does one of them understand that the other doesn't? I'll tell you something that's going to surprise you. Both the spiritual explanation and the scientific one point to the exact same conclusion, just from completely different paths. But to understand it, we need to start with what wisdom traditions have been saying for generations. Let's go to Louisiana first, specifically to the older neighborhoods of New Orleans, the Treme District and the 7th Ward, where there is a long, documented tradition of houseplant keeping that blends West African botanical wisdom with American folk practices. Families who trace their lineage back through generations of enslaved people brought plant knowledge with them, maintained it, passed it forward. Not as nostalgia, as practical household knowledge, as something that worked. In this tradition, certain plants are considered threshold guardians, plants placed at the boundary between the living space and the outside world. The ZZ plant, with its thick, waxy leaves and its almost supernatural toughness, earned a specific reputation in these households as a plant that absorbed and neutralized what one elderly keeper, a woman in her mid-80s living in the Treme, who had maintained houseplants for over 60 years, described to me as the heaviness people carry in. What she said was this: when that plant starts turning on you, it's not the plant that's sick. Something in the house got too heavy. Too much worry, too much argument, too much that ain't been said. The plant takes it first. It always tells you before you know to ask. She told me that in the summer of 1987, shortly after a difficult period of tension in her household, her ZZ plant, which she'd kept healthy for over a decade, began yellowing at the base. She treated it as a household signal. Changes were made. Conversations happened. The plant, once the underlying conditions shifted, recovered. She noted that this pattern, plant yellowing as a precursor to household strain, had repeated itself in her home at least 4 times in her life. She didn't call it superstition. She called it pattern recognition. What these communities documented wasn't mystical. It was observational. They watched their plants the way farmers watch weather. And what they understood, long before any botanist published a paper on it, was that environmental stress shows up in plants first. The plant is a sensor. Now let's go further back, to the Mascarene region, specifically the coastal environments of eastern Tanzania and the islands of Zanzibar, which is where Zamioculcas zamiifolia is actually native. Where this plant comes from in its original ecosystem, before anyone moved it to a shelf in a Chicago apartment. In village traditions along this coast, the ZZ plant was not typically kept indoors. It grew along the margins of settlements, at the edge of compounds, near doorways, in the semi-shaded zones between built structures and open ground. And when the plant began to show stress, yellowing, softening at the stem, it was read as a signal from the land itself, not a punishment, a communication. In these communities, the practice when a threshold plant began yellowing was specific. The plant was not immediately moved or discarded. First, the household would gather. Not formally, no ceremony, no announcement, just a coming together to assess what had changed. Had someone in the household been unwell? Had there been conflict that was unresolved? Had the rain pattern shifted? Had someone new entered the household's orbit who carried their own troubles? The word used in Swahili-adjacent dialects of this region for what the plant was doing translates loosely as speaking before the silence, which is to say, before things got quiet in the way trouble makes things quiet, before someone got sick, before something broke, before the argument that couldn't be taken back. The plant spoke. Yellow leaves were the first word. What the community did next was address root causes, not symptoms. They didn't pour more water on the plant. They asked what the plant was responding to. Now we move to the American Southwest, specifically to the Hopi people of northeastern Arizona, who have an extraordinarily sophisticated relationship with plant behavior as environmental signal. The Hopi agricultural calendar is one of the most complex in the world. They dry farm in high desert conditions. They have watched plants carefully for centuries the way others watch stars. The ZZ plant is not native to the American Southwest. It arrived as a houseplant relatively recently, but Hopi botanical observers made note of its behavior almost immediately. What they recognized in it was a quality they have a specific concept for: the idea of a plant that holds what the land cannot yet show. A plant that registers invisible change. An elder in the Hopi community, speaking about plant behavior as environmental signal, said this: "The plant knows the water before the cloud arrives. What it shows you is what the ground already knows." What's fascinating is that this observation, made without spectrometers or moisture sensors, aligns exactly with what plant physiologists confirmed decades later: that changes in root zone conditions register first in the oldest, lowest leaves of a plant before any surface symptom appears. The yellowing you see is lagging behind the actual event by days, sometimes weeks. The plant knew first. The community watched the plant, and they responded to early signals rather than waiting for crisis. That is not superstition. That is early warning system design. And then there's feng shui. In the practice as it developed through Hong Kong and Shanghai, in the hands of practitioners working with modern urban environments, the ZZ plant holds a specific energetic designation. It is classified as a wood element plant with strong protective qi. Its thick, waxy leaves are considered to deflect sha qi, what's sometimes called sharp or cutting energy. And its rhizomatic root system is associated with grounded, stable household energy. Feng shui placement of the ZZ plant is precise. In the entrance area, near the main door, it is said to absorb negative energy before it enters the home. In the living room, positioned in the southeastern sector, it is associated with financial stability and the steady accumulation of resources. In the home office, it is placed to counteract anxious or scattered thinking, grounding the mind in the same way the plant's roots ground themselves in thick, water-storing tissue. But here's what the feng shui tradition says about yellowing specifically, and this is the part that is rarely discussed outside of practitioner circles. Yellowing in a protective plant is not failure. It is completion. The plant, in this framework, has absorbed what it was placed there to absorb. It has done its job. The yellow leaves are the receipt. The response is not panic. The response is acknowledge what was taken in, remove the affected leaves, assess what in the space produced the energy load that required this much absorption, and then correct it. What's interesting is that feng shui doesn't contradict science here. It complements it in a way that I find absolutely extraordinary. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. If this is already shifting how you see your ZZ plant, hit that like button right now. That one gesture tells the platform this content matters, and it allows me to keep going deep on topics like this. Now comes the scientific part, and I promise, when you hear it, everything is going to make sense. The ZZ plant yellows for reasons that are entirely traceable. Not mysterious, not random. There is a specific biological sequence happening inside that plant, and once you understand it, every piece of traditional wisdom we just discussed will click into place in a way that is almost startling. Let's start with what's actually happening in the root zone. The ZZ plant stores water and nutrients in its rhizomes, those thick, potato-like root structures that sit just below the soil surface. Think of them like a battery. When conditions are right, the plant draws on the battery slowly, efficiently, in a controlled way. It's designed to operate in dry, then wet, then dry cycles. That's its native rhythm. Wet season comes, rhizomes fill up, plant draws on reserves through the dry season. Extremely efficient. Almost no waste. But when you put that plant in a pot, in a home, the conditions change. And the most common disruption is this. The soil never fully dries between waterings. Or the pot has no drainage. Or both. When excess moisture sits in the root zone, two things happen. First, the oxygen in the soil, which the roots need the way you need air, gets displaced. The roots begin to suffocate. Second, anaerobic bacteria, the kind that thrive without oxygen, begin to colonize. And those bacteria produce compounds that are toxic to root tissue. The roots stop functioning. They stop transporting water and nutrients upward, and the plant, now unable to support all its leaves equally, begins to triage. And here's the detail that changes everything. The plant does not yellow randomly. It yellows strategically. It sacrifices the oldest, lowest leaves first, the ones that are farthest from the growing tip, the ones that represent the most biological investment for the least current return. The plant is shedding weight. It is pulling nutrients back out of those leaves before releasing them. That yellowing is actually the plant reclaiming phosphorus, nitrogen, and magnesium from dying tissue and redirecting those nutrients toward newer growth. This is what researchers at the University of Florida's Environmental Horticulture Department have documented in detail when studying tropical storage root plants under variable moisture conditions. The plant is not dying passively. It is managing its death with extraordinary precision. Dr. Thomas Yeager, a professor and extension specialist in environmental horticulture at the University of Florida, whose work on container-grown tropical foliage plants spans more than 2 decades, has noted that the yellowing pattern in ZZ plants under overwatering stress is a highly ordered process. It follows a predictable sequence, outer, lower leaves first, that reflects the plant's prioritization of new meristematic tissue over old. The plant knows exactly what it's doing. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's work on interior tropical plants corroborates this. Their research on drought and flood cycle response in storage root species found that ZZ plants exposed to consistently moist soil, no dry cycle, showed root decline within 6 to 8 weeks that was not visible above the soil surface for another 2 to 4 weeks after that. The yellowing you see in October may have been triggered by something that started in August. You are seeing the echo of a past condition, not the current one. Here's the concept that ties everything together. Moderate stress activates extraordinary responses. Scientists call this hormesis, which simply means that small doses of stress, applied and then removed, make a biological organism stronger and more responsive. A plant that experiences regular dry periods between waterings develops more robust root tissue, more efficient water use mechanisms, and a larger rhizome reserve than a plant kept consistently moist. The dry period isn't cruelty, it is calibration. It is also worth noting that NASA's Clean Air study, conducted at the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi in the late 1980s, identified the ZZ plant family as one of several tropical plants capable of filtering specific volatile organic compounds from enclosed spaces. This is relevant because the compounds NASA identified, benzene, toluene, xylene, are precisely the kinds of low-level chemical stressors that accumulate in homes with new furniture, new flooring, recently painted walls, or poor ventilation. The plant is actively processing those compounds. That processing creates metabolic load. And metabolic load, combined with suboptimal watering, can tip the plant toward visible stress faster than either condition would alone. The energy redirect moment is this. The plant was using its stored reserves to maintain full leaf coverage. But once root function declined, once the battery was no longer being recharged properly, the plant redirected that stored energy away from maintenance and toward survival. Yellow leaves are that redirection made visible. Do you see what this means? The traditions that said the plant is responding to something in the household, they were right. The plant is an environmental sensor. What Hopi observers called what the land already knows. What Tanzanian communities called speaking before the silence. What Feng Shui calls the absorption of Sha Qi. All of them were describing, in different languages, the same biological reality. That this plant registers environmental disruption before humans do, and communicates that disruption through its leaves. Ancient traditions say the yellowing ZZ plant is speaking. It has absorbed something, stress, heaviness, disrupted energy, and it is showing you the proof in its leaves. Feng Shui says the yellowing is not failure, it is completion. The plant has done exactly what it was placed there to do. Now the environment needs to be corrected so the plant can reset. Science says the yellowing is a precisely ordered triage response to environmental disruption. Excess moisture, insufficient light, accumulated metabolic stress, communicated through the oldest leaves first, in a sequence that began weeks before you noticed it. They are all describing the same thing, just in different languages. The common thread, the thing every tradition and every laboratory finding points to, is this. The ZZ plant is a living record of its environment. What surrounds it shapes it. A stable, intentional, well-considered environment produces a healthy, thriving plant. A chaotic, overlooked, inconsistent environment produces the yellow leaves you're looking at right now. 2 different paths, one identical truth. Now I know you've been waiting for this part. Here is exactly what to do when your ZZ plant starts turning yellow, and more importantly, why these steps work at the biological level. The first factor is the watering cycle, and this is the one most people get wrong. Not because they're careless, but because the ZZ plant looks like a houseplant that needs houseplant watering. It does not. What it needs is a complete dry cycle between waterings. In practice, for most American homes, this means watering deeply. Water runs out the drainage hole, and then waiting. In summer, in a bright room, that wait is typically 2 to 3 weeks. In winter, in lower light, it can be 4 to 6 weeks. The test is not a calendar. The test is a finger 2 inches into the soil. If it's dry 2 inches down, water. If there's any moisture at that depth, wait. That's the whole rule. The second factor is drainage, and this one is non-negotiable. The ZZ plant must be in a pot with a drainage hole. Full stop. A pot without drainage is a water trap, and no amount of careful watering will compensate for it. If you're at Home Depot or Lowe's and you find a pot you love that has no drainage hole, get a drill and make one, or use it as a cashpo around a plastic nursery pot that drains freely. The soil matters too. A standard potting mix, something like Miracle-Gro Indoor or Fox Farms Happy Frog, works. But you'll get better results if you mix in about 20% perlite to increase drainage and aeration. That small adjustment changes the root zone environment significantly. The third factor is light, and specifically, light consistency. The ZZ plant will survive in low light, but here's what most people don't know. Surviving and maintaining full, healthy leaf color are two different things. A ZZ in dim light will go weeks longer between waterings, which sounds like a benefit, but it also means the soil stays wet longer, which increases root stress risk. In most American homes, a north-facing window gives dim, consistent, indirect light. Good for the plant's long-term health, but watering intervals need to lengthen accordingly. An east-facing window with morning light is closer to the plant's native habitat, bright but not harsh. Avoid direct afternoon sun from west-facing windows, which in summer can bleach and scorch those dark, waxy leaves. The fourth factor is the root zone itself. If your ZZ has been yellowing for more than a few weeks, there's a real chance that root damage has already occurred. The recovery process begins when you unpot the plant, gently shake off the old soil, and inspect the rhizomes. Healthy rhizomes are firm, pale, almost cream-colored. Damaged rhizomes are soft, brown, and may smell faintly of decay. Any soft, brown root material needs to be removed with clean scissors. Cornell Cooperative Extension recommends sterilizing scissors with diluted bleach between cuts when dealing with possible root rot to prevent spreading. Repot in fresh, well-draining mix in a pot only slightly larger than the root ball, and hold off on watering for 2 to 3 days to let any cut surfaces dry and callous. The fifth factor is temperature and airflow, and this is the one nobody talks about. The ZZ plant is native to warm, humid environments, but in its native habitat, it also experiences consistent air movement. Stagnant, cold air, like what you find near a drafty window in winter or directly under an air conditioning vent in summer, disrupts the plant's transpiration process. Transpiration is how the plant moves water from its roots through its tissue and out through tiny pores on its leaves. When that process is disrupted by cold air or excessive heat, the plant's ability to regulate its own internal water balance is compromised, and that stress compounds any root zone issues that are already present. Keep the ZZ away from cold drafts below 60 degrees Fahrenheit and away from direct AC or heating vents. And the final factor, the one nobody wants to hear, is patience. Once you've corrected the root zone, adjusted the watering cycle, optimized the light and drainage, the plant will not immediately turn green. The yellow leaves are already yellow. They will not recover. Remove them cleanly. But what you're waiting for is new growth. new shoots emerging from the soil, new leaflets unfurling on existing stems. In a ZZ plant, that new growth is slow. We are talking 4 to 8 weeks minimum before you see meaningful evidence of recovery. This is a plant that operates on a different clock than you do. It is not impatient. It does not rush. The best things in a garden, and maybe anywhere, cannot be forced into faster timelines than they're built for. But I promise you, when you see that new growth emerge, clean and dark and waxy and new, knowing that you understood what the plant was telling you, that will feel like something. Here's the part I find most worth sitting with. The ZZ plant yellowing is not a catastrophe, but it is asking for your attention in the most direct way it knows how. This is a plant that has survived conditions that should have killed it. Dry seasons that stretch for months, soils that turn to dust, competition from scrubland vegetation that would crowd out anything less determined. It doesn't yellow easily. When it does, it means something crossed a threshold. Something in its environment passed a line the plant had been quietly managing for weeks without complaint. And the fact that this plant, which survives neglect, which asks almost nothing, reached a point where it had to speak loudly enough for you to notice. That says something worth listening to. You may not have seen it coming, but the plant did. It always does. What's extraordinary is that this is true of environments in general. Disruption builds quietly. It accumulates. It registers in the most sensitive systems first, and often those are the living systems, the ones with roots in the ground and no ability to lie about what the conditions actually are. The ZZ plant doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It tells you what's true. Correct the environment. Give it the dry cycle it needs. Give it the drainage it requires. Give it the light it was built for. And then, here's the part that applies far beyond plants. Trust that a system in the right conditions will recover on its own timeline. The best environments don't need to be rescued. They need to be maintained. Has your ZZ plant ever turned yellow? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Take care of your plants.